Scriptures come from the book of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. I'm going to read you verse 27 leading into. But truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the kingdom of God. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure when he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. But since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, is it good for us to be here? Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one of any of the things they had seen. Through these words, God is still speaking.
Thanks be to our still speaking God. Many years ago, I had the opportunity of being in Germany at the invitation of the United States Army to do those type things because of my specialty training. I chose the whole Army, the United States Army Security Agency, that had my MOS, so they couldn't have us both on the same side of the world. So they decided I needed to go to Germany for a while. Well, there, my friends and I did a lot of traveling around the weekends we got a chance. One of the places we went, I drew it up, was Salzburg, Austria. Have you ever been there? It's gorgeous. We went down to the salt mines, wore our little aprons and our hats, and rode the train. They asked you to ride down, got a little postcard. I pictured one of everybody else on the train and sent home. My dad said, "Yeah, that's an interesting card." I said, "Well, look at it again, I'm in there." "Oh yeah, there you are," Didn't even think about that. But then the biggest part of that trip, we went to the top of the mountain. It's by cable car. You see Untersberg Mountain. It's actually a precipice that's not quite as high as the rest of them. But atop that mountain gained prominence when a movie was made, way back, shortly after that, in 1965. Anybody know what that movie was?
Sound of Music.
Yep. Where she's dancing, I stood. Not then I didn't. But it was gorgeous. But you know what? When you get up, you find out it's not as big as it looks. That area is not that big. In fact, if you go about 50 yards behind her, it slopes way down. But if you go from there, around the other side, that's one of the pictures you get. It's not mine. I wish it was, but I couldn't find mine. It was glorious, beautiful that day. In fact, as you looked across, you go about 60 yards this direction. There's a little Gasthaus there that wasn't open at the time due to the weather. But then just beside that is the monument. The first salt miners killed in World War II. And you go on around, you can stand right at the edge of the mountain. You're 6,500 feet in the air. You see for miles and miles and miles. And it rained that morning before we got there. So when we first got to the cable car house, you couldn't see the mountain at all. You could, nothing but a cloud. But as that cloud started to clear, this big cable starts to appear. And it's just going up into heaven. It was weird because as that fog cleared more, you see further and further. They wouldn't let the car go up unless you could see the second tower. So that's a long distance. But you stay looking down, and the thing was, if you look this direction,
because of the weather, there's a big double rainbow. Very brilliant. It was gorgeous. It's one of those times when you just wish you could stay right there. You just felt God's presence at the top of that mountain. You knew it was breathtaking. That doesn't really do justice to what I saw that day. It was the closest picture I could find to it. So, we all have those type situations. Now, I know I'll never get a chance to go back and see that again. I wish I could. I'd love to go back to Germany. I love Germany. Sprechen Sie Deutsch nicht so gut. But it's an interesting thing to be able to do that and to enjoy that and feel God's presence. Now, most of us at some time or other have felt like we were on top of the world. Really happy. Confident we knew all the answers. Could solve all the problems that came up. We felt that we were really close to God, like I did here. I mean, to realize and look at the majesty of what He's done. It's just awesome. But in those moments, we feel like we're really excited, really alive. And everything seemed new to us. Well, that moment might have come for others as an exciting time in your life, like graduation, baptism, your first kiss. You all remember that, don't you? No? Well, relive it. Your first day of a first job in your life. Your wedding. You all remember those, don't you? The birth of that first child. Or the expectancy of another child. Even catching your very first fish for some of you guys. It might have been something very spiritual. Like a week at church camp or a church retreat. Or it might have been something of a smaller, quieter nature. Like a very intimate conversation with your mother or father. You felt that they honestly understood what you were saying and where you were coming from and why you felt the way you did. We call these mountaintop experiences. You know how we hate to come down from that mountaintop. We want to hang in there at that moment as long as we can. Let's just stay right here and let the rest of the world kind of go on by for a while. But to freeze that one moment, in time shuts up all the possibilities of the next moment. In the gospel reading that Jude read for us today, we hear the writer of Luke give us his version of the event we call the transfiguration of Jesus. Sounds real theological, don't it? It just means something changed. In the passage, Jesus took Peter and James and John to the top of the mountain to show them who he really was. Not just a great prophet, but God's own Son. Now we need to remember that he was just about to set out to Jerusalem in the cross. We've already looked at one great moment when he asked his disciples whom they believed him to be. This is Jesus' way to find out if just maybe someone had realized who he really was before now. And what happened on that Mount of Transfiguration we'll never know, but we see from Luke's account that something pretty significantly out of the ordinary did take place. For Jesus, the time had come for him to seek the approval of God for the decisive step he was about to take. Our passage tells us that the disciples were heavy with sleep. While Jesus was off praying, and when they woke up, they saw Jesus had not only changed his appearance, but now there were two men standing there talking with him. The disciples reckoned one as Moses, the great lawgiver of the people of Israel. The second is Elijah, the greatest of the prophets. And the appearance of these princes of Israel's life and thought and religion seems to suggest that Jesus was to go on. Our passage tells us that God's voice singled out Jesus as a long-awaited Messiah who possessed divine authority. And Jesus would now fulfill both the law and the prophets. So now Jesus can move ahead with his mission to Jerusalem knowing that all three actually knew who he was. Certain that what he was to do and what he was going to do would be a culmination of all the life and thought and work of the nation. And certainly God fully approved of the steps he was taking. Now, just I would have liked to have stayed on that mountaintop. just for another moment. Others would like to stay on their mountaintops for that moment, to retain that mountain experience. The disciples wanted to stay on that mountaintop. Peter jumps up. He wants to build 3 tents, a tent for each one of them. He wanted to hold tight to that moment and not let it slip away. It suggested he may have been thinking of the Feast of Tabernacles, where shelters were erected to commemorate the Exodus. Peter wanted to do whatever he could to keep Moses and Elijah with him. To prevent this mountain from ending. This wasn't God's plan. Never had been his plan. Peter's decision to build shelters for Jesus, Moses, Elijah could have been his way of understanding that real faith is built on 3 cornerstones: the law, the prophet, and Jesus. And fortunately, Peter would grow in his understanding. And eventually he could write of Jesus as a chosen and precious cornerstone of the church. I met Peter, James, and John experienced a wonderful moment on that mountain. Didn't want to leave. Sometimes we too have such an inspired experience that we want to stay right where we are, the reality of problems of our daily lives. We want to struggles await us in the valley as we go back down. That makes us want to linger at the mountaintop. It's staying on the top of the mountain prohibits us from ministering to others. Instead of becoming spiritual gifts, we'd soon be dwarfed by our self-centeredness. We need times to retreat and renew. We call them vacations. But only so we can return to minister to the world. We all need time to refresh ourselves, to kind of get the flame going again. But our faith must make sense of the mountain as well as being on it. It's like this new preacher moved to a new church. Particular church didn't have a lawnmower. I've been there. So he was looking for someone to either mow the lawn or sell him a new lawnmower. And one day he saw this young man going down the road pushing a lawnmower. So the preacher asked him, "Hey, looking for a job?" And he said, "Sure." Turned out he was mowing yards and trying to earn money to buy a bicycle. And the preacher was kind of young and didn't mind mowing, so he told the young man, "Hey," he says, "Look, I've got a 10-speed bicycle. I don't ride much. I'll trade you my bike for your mower." Well, the young man was all for that. So he took the bicycle, reached the mower, and he took off. So, the young man rode around the block. He came back, see the preacher still standing in the same spot he was in with his mower, wiping the sweat from his brow. But he hadn't mowed a lick. The preacher waved the boy over and says, "Hey, I pulled this rope a half dozen times and the lawnmower just won't start." The young man looks at him and goes, "Well, preacher, I hate to tell you, this got a special kind of lawnmower. You have to cuss at it to get it to start." The preacher looks at me and says, "Well, I've been in ministry so long, I don't know if I can remember how to cuss." The young man began laughing. He says, "Pull that rope some more and you'll get it back." The point is, we ought not stay on that mountaintop so long that we forget what it's like to be in the crowd. Like Peter, we shouldn't forget our work in the crowds. But notice that Jesus quickly led the disciples back down that mountaintop, in spite of Peter's desire to pitch a tent and camp there for a long while. Jesus led them back down in the daily routine of teaching and preaching and caring for the broken and the hurting people of the world that they lived in. Back to the reality of life in the valleys. Same thing we have to do. And that same Jesus who leads us to those spiritual high places also leads us to caring for the hurting, the broken-hearted children, to minister to the homeless, to bind up the wounds of a broken world, or simply to tend to the needs of our brothers and sisters. Kind of like what we're having pancake breakfast for us. When you experience a mountaintop, don't forget the valley below. Jesus is there in the valley, in a long-term facility, like a long-term care facility. Jesus is there in the valley of fear and tears of everyday life. Jesus is there in the valley of the joy of the birth of a child. He's there in the valley of the aching loneliness of a shut-in. Jesus is there at the repeated failures of his followers. As God's Son, Jesus has God's power and authority. Thus his word should be our final authority. If a person teaching is true, he will agree with Jesus' teaching. Just everything you hear against Jesus' word, you can never be led astray. Don't be hasty to seek advice and guidance from merely human resources and thereby neglect the guidance message. Peter needed that mountaintop, believe me. We all need that mountaintop. If there's that, he learned he needed to listen to Jesus. God himself helped Peter understand this. We all have those moments or wouldn't be here. Moments when we learned we needed to listen to Jesus. Let me tell you a wonderful secret. Peter didn't go up that mountaintop to find God. God brought Peter to that mountain. God revealed himself to Peter. We don't find God in mountaintops. God finds us, folks. God finds us. In the book Unconditional Love, Father John Powell tells about a young man, Tommy, a student in this class, the Theology of Faith this class. Tommy turns out to be an atheist in residence in this course. He constantly objected to, smirked at, or whined about the possibility of an unconditionally loving Father God. At the end of the course, he asked in a slightly cynical tone, "Do you think I'll ever find God?" Powell decided to do a little shock therapy. "No," he said. "Oh," Hunter responded. "I thought that was the product that you were pushing." He said, "I let him go 5 steps from the door and then called out, 'Tommy, I don't think you'll ever find him, but I'm absolutely certain he'll find you.'" He shrugged a little and left my class and my life. Later I heard a report that Tommy graduated. I was duly grateful. Then a sad report. Tommy had terminal cancer. Before I could search him out, he came to see me. "Tommy, I thought about you a lot. I heard you were sick." "Oh yeah, very sick. Can we talk about it?" "Sure. Would you like to know?" "What's it like to be only 24 and dying?" "Well, it could be worse." "Like what?" Tommy says, "Well, like being 50 and having no values or ideals. Like being 50 and thinking that booze and making money are real biggies in life." "But what I really think about is what I came to see you about," Tom said. "It's something you said to me on the last day of class. I asked you if I thought I'd ever find God. You said no, which surprised me. Then you said, 'But he will find you.' So I thought about that a lot, even though my search for God was not at all intense at the time. And one day I woke up and decided to spend what time I had doing something more profitable. I thought about you and your class. Remember something else you said. The essential sadness is to go through life without living. But it would be almost equally sad to go through life and leave this world without ever telling those you love that you love them. So I began with the hardest one, my dad. He was reading a newspaper and I approached him. "Dad?" "Yeah, what?" Didn't even lower the newspaper. "Dad, I'd like to talk to you." "Well, talk." "I mean, it's really important." The newspaper came down about 3 inches just with eyes across the top of it.
That newspaper fell to the floor. And my dad did two things I could not remember doing before. He cried. He hugged me. He said, it felt so good to be so close to my father, to see his tears, feel his hug, hear him say that he loved me. It was easier with my mother, a little harder with my brother. For certain things we had been keeping secret for so many years. Then one day I turned around, and God was there. Apparently, God does things in his own way, at his own time. But the most important thing is that he was there. He found me. You were right. He found me even after I stopped looking for him. God clearly identified Jesus as his son, before saying that Peter and the others were to listen to Jesus and not their own ideas and desires. The ability to follow Jesus comes from confidence about who he is. If we believe he is God's son, then we surely want to do what he says to do. Everett Mark Bart, in Mountains, Valleys, and Plains, said, I like the quotation of Terry Crump, a Scottish theologian, when he said, God does not make the mountains in order to be inhibited. God does not make the mountaintops for us to live on mountaintops. It is not God's desire that we live on mountaintops. We only ascend to the heights to catch a broader vision of the earthly surroundings below. But we don't live there. We don't tarry there. The streams begin at the uplands, but the streams descend quickly to gladden the valleys below. The streams start in the mountaintops to come down to gladden the valleys below. You and I experience the valleys of life. You and I both know what happens the next day coming down to the mountain. It's the real world and the real life, the real struggles we have every single day. After Sundays of life, there are always Mondays. We always get up groaning, oh God, it's Monday again. But that's life. We have our mountaintops, we come back to the valley. You know, that's a tough one of life. But God is there with us on those Monday mornings. On the mountaintop of transfiguration, God reveals himself to us. He finds us, reveals to us his plan. It's found in Jesus. We're to listen to him. Have you come to a place in your life where you've listened? Listened to the parables, learned from his teachings, watched his miracles, felt his sacrificial love. Well, if you haven't, then you let go and experience those mountains.